Hello. Is my mic on? Yes. I would like to open our space today with a few acknowledgements. The first is the acknowledgement of the land that we're on as a living entity, not a resource to be owned or exploited. The next one is acknowledging ourselves as an extension of that land. So we are land. Back home in South America, where we live and work, when we open spaces, we often do these land acknowledgements by acknowledging the indigenous peoples of the land, both to remind ourselves that we live under a state of unauthorized occupation in indigenous territories, and also to remind ourselves that it is indigenous folks who guard the knowledge of how to live in right relationship with the earth. Here in the UK, however, in order to open the space with a land acknowledgement, we need to acknowledge that the comforts and securities enjoyed in these territories are largely at the expense of indigenous lands and lives, exploitation and expropriation, and even genocide. This is a hard truth to hold, but an important one for us to do the work today of this session. That also involves facing our responsibility with the intensification of genocide in Palestine and in many other places in the world. With that, I want to acknowledge that we are all family, everybody in this room. We're a very complicated family, but a family nonetheless. And that is a difficult and a beautiful responsibility to step up to. So I want to thank you for showing up here, for having difficult conversations in times of collapse.
So it's two of us standing here today. My name is Camilla, and I'm from Brazil.
And I am Azul, I'm from Colombia.
But we represent a collective of people called Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. And we are a collective of artists, of educators, facilitators, researchers, indigenous and non-indigenous folks, and some elders as well. And we're gladly here to represent them. And all this pedagogy that we bring through the collective is only possible by the weaving of all this knowledge, of all these networks that we are part of. In the GTDF collective, we developed pedagogical inquiries and pedagogical tools that help us move through complex conversations and the difficult times that we are all facing together, without feeling overwhelmed or immobilized, so without being caught in those loops that prevents us from acting. So we invite you to use one of these tools through this workshop. So for that, I'm going to invite you for a quick 1-minute crash course on the pedagogical tool that is called The Bus Within Us. Here it is. So at any given moment, the idea is that you imagine yourself as a bus full of passengers. So at any given moment, you might have different responses to the things that we're bringing here and to other things that you're listening throughout the conference. So the idea is to sit with these voices, to understand that there are different voices inside of your head or mind or body, however you see yourself, and to not over-identify with them, not engage too much, rather than observing it from a little bit more distance.
No, that's the wrong screen.
Yeah.
Can we go back to
Sorry.
Can we go back to our presentation, please?
Yeah, we're not using the app yet. So later on, we'll be using the app for a few social experiments.
And now you kind of know what we're going to ask you.
So these passengers that might come up throughout the session today, they might be feeling joy, they might be feeling anger, they might be feeling like they're tired or bored because you just had lunch and it's a long day. And perhaps some of them will be also feeling relieved that someone is finally talking about this in this way that we're trying to address here in the conference. So the idea is that you observe these passengers, don't engage too much, and this is already a psychoanalytical distancing tool that we invite you to engage in order to hold complexity within oneself so that we are able also to hold the complexity of the problems of the crisis that we are living around us. So with this tool in mind, we invite you also to, throughout the session, engage in the app with the Q&A. So if you want to formulate questions, may that come from different passengers inside your bus. So feel free, it's anonymous, feel free to tap into different passengers that have different questions. You may think they're silly, or you may think that they are overthinking or something, but you can tap into those questions. We'll try to have some time to address the questions in the end, but we would also like to say that we're not about giving answers or fixed answers or anything. So the idea here is mostly the exercise of how you relate to this passenger and to these questions that you might have. So with that in mind, with this tool, let's begin our exploration.
Can I please have my slides back?
We're not using the word cloud now. Thank you.
For oh, awesome. Okay.
It desynced though.
But now it's not synced with these. Can you move this one to the next one, please? Okay, great. Now we're in the same place. Awesome. Great. So as Camilla said, in the collective we develop what we call technologies of inquiry. So these are tools that help us navigate complexity. One of them is the bus, which is a diffractive tool of the self. And another one are social cartographies. This is one of them. It's called The House that Modernity Built. It's a story. And I think it draws into a lot of parallel with what Echo was sharing earlier in this same room related to the bricks, if some of you were here. So I'm going to move through these 4 slides very quickly because we don't have that much time. And wait, the important thing about, before I go into this, the important thing about social cartographies is that they're not fixed descriptions of reality. They're tools to help us navigate difficult conversations. So if you have passengers that want to argue about a specific fact or way a metaphor is framed, tell them to please sit down because this is not the space to do that. Okay, so let's move through it. This is the house that modernity built. Here we see a house that is exceeding the limits of the planet, a planet that is sick because of climate collapse. And here we have the floor of separability. This is what our indigenous researchers in the collective call the disease of separability, which is the belief or the illusion that we humans are separate from nature. They explain that this is the floor that sustains the house. This illusion creates a fracture in our sense of identity. The wall of universal reason pertains to the epistemology of European humanism, which was created during the Renaissance and then fully formed in the Enlightenment. And this, amongst many other characteristics that it has, it creates a linear path of progress and it places white, cis, often men, individuals at the top of that progress line. And what it also does is that it deems every other way of knowing as illegitimate, which often then legitimizes genocide or expropriation of other people's lands and lives because they are deemed as less than human. This is also known as epistemicide, which has to do with the ways we know. Then we have the next wall, which is the wall of the nation state. The wall of the nation state is designed to keep the promises of cohesion, coherence, and identity, and security. Often, state violence is used in order to keep this cohesion, and this force is framed as self-defense. So moving to the next slide of the house. Oh, wait, I missed the roof. Sorry. There's a roof of Global Capital. The house wouldn't be complete without its roof. In fact, this roof of Global Capital kind of keeps things running in the house and makes the living quarters much more comfortable for those of us who live within the house. Through history, there has been many different roofs. There was industrial capitalism, then shareholder capitalism, which diffused responsibility for corporate harm amongst many anonymous shareholders. And now we're in algorithmic capitalism, which makes it even more obscure to track who's responsible or accountable for harm because of the incorporation of AI, big data, and automation. Regardless of the characteristics of this roof, global capital is central to the structuring of this house. But now let me expand a little bit on what I mean by harm. Some folks think about it as externalities. However, negative externalities only make sense under the paradigm of separability. If we understand that we're not separate from nature, there's no such thing as a negative externality because everything, I am entangled to everything and therefore responsible for it. So this is the wall of the hidden costs. The hidden costs of the House of Modernity have to do with the fact that the house's shiny promises of consumption, comfort, safety, and social mobility are subsidized by destitution, dispossession, genocide, and ecocide. For example, We have more modern slaves today than ever in history. According to the International Labor Organization, there's 40 million modern slaves working today. And you might have passengers in your bus who say, this has nothing to do with me. This is a terrible truth, but it has nothing to do with me. But you might also have other passengers inside of you who know that these are the folks who mine the resources for our mobile phones and our computers, who harvest our food, who are in charge of making our clothes, our transportation. It's just their labor or their relationship with us is invisibilized by the house, because the house is incredibly clever at invisibilizing these costs. And there's many other costs. This includes preventable famines, indigenous displacement, toxic waste, the mental health crisis, which is affecting my generation really strongly right now. Regardless of, and the list goes on. The important thing to understand here is this relationship with how these costs are invisibilized, and it makes the house very comfortable. Take this research, for example. You can't really see it here because of the colors. Okay, it doesn't make sense if we can see the graph, but this is a brilliant study done by Jason Hickel and his team, and I'm just going to skip it because it doesn't make sense if you can't read the graph.
Okay, I think you can explain.
Yeah, I should just go for it? Okay. So here, if you could see the positive, which is in light gray, and the negative is in dark gray. So the negative shows the resources exported by the Global South, and the positive are the resources imported by the Global South. And if you could see, the difference is astonishing. In here you would see the global north, the imports being about, oh my God, it's so hard to keep this laser still. Anyways, go look it up, Google it. The point is, believe me, take my word for it, that the analysis of these 4 key areas, which are raw materials, embodied land, embodied energy, and embodied labor, demonstrate a significant and an ongoing resource drain from the Global South to the Global North. In other words, the economic prosperity and development of the North is largely at the expense of the Global South, which also shows us that colonialism is not just an event in the past, but an ongoing system that continues to shape global inequalities today. And if we go back to that floor of separability, this means that all of us who live within the house and enjoy the comforts of the house have a political, a historical, and an existential debt towards the land. And remember, people are land too. Which brings me to the next slide of the house, which further complexifies the relationship between Global North and Global South. Oh, and that's super pixelated. Okay, great. Well, here we have the penthouse of the house. This is the north of the north. These are the people with the most wealth and power, who have historically had the most wealth and power in the house. And even though they're the folks with the highest amount of ecological devastation footprint, they're also the ones with the biggest influence over global decision making. Then we have here the north of the South. These are folks that have attained significant wealth and power in countries in the Global South, mainly. And then we have the south of the North. These folks are the folks who have arrived to these places, often fleeing their homelands because of the consumption patterns of those in the North. And they are the ones who often do our personal cooking, cleaning, taking care of our children, transportation. And so in so many ways, they keep the house running, but they live here in the basement of the house. Then we have the stairs of social mobility, the ladder of social mobility, which represents the meritocratic paradigm that serves as a very important mechanism for the house, because it tells the story that anybody, regardless of their starting point, can attain the comforts of those living in the North, which keeps people following and obedient to the house's values and aspirations. And now I want to bring your attention to the south of the south, which is here, outside of the house, and it's drowning in the sewage of the house. I guess we're also missing the arrow here where their lands are being expropriated to bring resources into the house. And these are the folks who have historically subsidized the construction of this house through their labor and their resources. They don't enjoy the securities and the comforts of the house at all, and they also endure the most severe consequences of the exploitation that is needed for the house to keep running. They also are the folks who protect the ecosystems that we all need to survive, as well as the knowledge, the sacred knowledge of how to live outside of this house and in right relationship with the earth. So we arrived at this last slide, which is showing us collapse. There's many different ways to engage with this slide. Some might think that all these cracks are unrelated to each other. The mental health crisis with the political and economic breakdown, climate collapse, etc. Another way to engage with this slide, especially for those who have been outside of the house, is to understand that all these cracks are related to each other, which this is what people call the polycrisis, but then understanding that they're not only related to each other, but that they're also due to the fundamental failures of the architecture of the house. In other words, that floor of separability is what is creating this whole mess, and that is what some people call the meta-crisis. We are facing the end of the world as we know it. And our imagination has been colonized to such degree that we cannot imagine anything outside of the same house. And so we're left with the question of what to do. Do we fix the house? Do we expand it? Do we build another one? Do we find another planet?
So now, with that, we're moving to the psychoaffective layers of the house and how this house of modernity inhabits each one of us here. So the thing here is that colonialism, we find out that colonialism is not only a system that operates globally, but it also has implication in our neurobiological system. Okay. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Boxhead here, this being with a huge box head and a tiny, tiny body. So his thinking and being is confined to rigid, reductionistic, linear, and logic perspectives, ways of thinking. And if you're raised within the house of modernity, you most likely have this passenger inside your bus. We all know him. Actually, most of the time, he's driving your bus, he's driving my bus, he's probably here in all of our buses right now. But the main thing we're trying to bring here with the bus and with the layer itself is that he's not the only one in your bus. So he's one among many other passengers. So trying to tap into that to relate to different passengers while we are doing this work, not only while we are in vacation or at the beach, but while doing this work as well. So Boxhead is built and Boxhead has built and it is continually built by the House of Modernity. So it's a movement here. But he's not the most mature passenger to face the deep complexity of the meta-crisis we're in. He's not a good passenger as well to build relationships. He has a transactional mindset here. He's always trying to calculate losses and benefits from everything that he does. And as he's addicted to consumption, not only of stuff, but also of knowledge, of status, of certainty as well, he struggles with navigating uncertainty. So he's always seeking for solutions. So he's very much solution-oriented and cannot navigate uncertainty, which is a crucial thing for us to deal with the collapse that we are living through. Next one. Thank you. So tunnel vision is a trait of Boxhead here. So he can see the polycrisis. A lot of times we're like, okay, I'm aware, I know that this crisis is super complicated and there are so many, but he can only tackle one issue at a time. So an example of that is an approach that focuses narrowly on reducing carbon emissions, does not address the root causes of ecological harm, nor it is aware of the consequences of false climate solutions to indigenous territories. So the carbon market, for example, more specifically, the carbon offsetting process, uses the global south as a carbon sink so that the global north does not change its emission and consumption patterns. Furthermore, these carbon mechanisms, for example, they limit indigenous autonomies within their territories in the south. And by putting a monetary value on the forest, it increases land speculation. And that land is still not on indigenous hands. It's still, this land back movement is still not working as it should. So rather than imposing the so-called nature-based solutions or other ways of trying to deal with the solution from a distance, we should understand that a myriad of different solutions and perspectives are needed at this point. So indigenous peoples, they have advanced relational technologies with the modern human world. So when we talk about developing different capacities, they have been doing this for thousands of years now. Indigenous peoples nowadays, they make up to 5% of the world's population approximately, and they take care of 80% of the biodiversity. Biodiversity on which we all depend on to survive. In other words, colonialism is a degenerative disease, a neurobiological impairment that keeps us trapped in a very, very narrow way of thinking, but also of feeling and relating. It's not only affecting our heads. So now we're moving to the exercise, to the bus exercise. So we invite you to log into your apps if you're not there yet, so that we can have some interaction here using the psychoanalytical tool that we presented earlier, the bus within you.
So it should be on Hall 2 in your app, and go to, what is it, word cloud? I'm not sure.
Hall 2, word cloud, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so follow me with this quick visualization that we're going to do. Check your bus, which is this diffractive way to understand yourself. And if you don't like the metaphor of the bus, you can use a campfire,
orchestra,
spaceship, an orchestra, that's a great one, a band, whatever helps you understand the plurivocal nature of ourselves. So observe that ecosystem within you. And I'm going to ask you a difficult thing. I'm going to ask you to choose an immature passenger within your bus. Somebody that you would be not normally kind of ashamed to bring to the light. And after listening to The House of Modernity Built and Boxed, try to write 1 to 3 words about what this passenger is saying or thinking or feeling. And just please be honest here, it's anonymous. This is a social experiment that we're doing to meet our collective immature bus. Sorry? Wise? Oh no, that's the second one. Oh my goodness, you ruined the surprise.
We're still into immature passenger.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see what happens. Let's just trust.
Yeah, but the question is more to the immature.
Well, the wise and mature passengers are saying this: listen, learn, stay true. More.
It's going to be a mix of both, probably.
So, the reason why mapping the immature passenger is so important is because we, in the House of Modernity, have been neurobiologically wired to be addicted to validation, to want to be seen as innocent, as heroic, as pure. And so it is quite comfortable to want to identify with wise and mature passengers. However, we often want to bypass the difficult work of identifying the immature passengers within ourselves. And if we don't do this work, it is these passengers that hijack the processes that are needed for us to show up in the world in a much more mature, responsible, and discerning way. And the only way to do that is with honesty, humility, hyper self-reflexivity, and humor. So, yeah, I guess now we just have a really... It sounds like they're all very mature. I mean, we have some people ashamed, frozen, reparations.
Which can come from the mature passenger as well. Sometimes shame is a response.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Thank you. So, before we continue, I would like to just check in with your bodies a little bit. I know we just had lunch, so I'm going to invite you, for those who can, to engage with this exercise in whatever degree is possible for your own body type. But I want to invite you to stand up from your chairs. And this is going to be very, very, very brief, but we're just going to do a simple somatic exercise, which is using polyvagal theory to just reset our nervous systems. And what we're going to do is we're going to feel our feet on the ground and feel that connection to gravity, which is a very important one. Unlock your knees. Take a deep breath. And now we're going to connect our fingertips above our head. And we're going to draw our midline going down very slowly through the front of our body while we breathe and our knees are unlocked. Very simple. We're just going to go down all the way until you're max. If you can touch the floor, that's great. And then come back up from the back, touching your fingertips again. Come back up from the back, drawing your midline from the back. And when you reach your limit, bring your hands on the side, shake them, and sit back down. Thank you.
So now we're going to be exploring the second cartography here, the social cartography. And one of the reminders is that it's not a fixed theory. So we're not trying to understand it as a fixed thing, rather than a tool to help us move through difficult conversations. And sometimes these difficult conversations happen within one's bus. And that's useful, very useful as well. So we're going to focus on different approaches of reforms on the funding ecology ecosystem, and considering philanthropy, impact investments, different types of funding. So don't get too attached to the terminology. We might not get it right and say all the complexity of this funding ecology, but this is what we're trying to show here. Can you pass one?
Yes.
Yeah, next one. Thank you. That's perfect. Okay, I'll stand here. So in the first space, the space of soft reform here, we ask ourselves the question: what strategies can we adopt to improve efficiency and effectiveness, to enhance inclusivity and ensure that marginalized communities are better served? So soft reform here operates within the familiar framework of modern colonial way of existing and of operating. So we are always seeking for universal answers, and it's very much solution-oriented. The image related to this space here is that the house is great. The house of modernity works great. We do need to patch a few cracks and try to get more people inside the house and up the ladder of social mobility. So let's do this work. We're inflating the house a little bit, but we're still doing this work of bringing more people into the house. So soft reform aims to enhance existing funding structures through incremental changes, mostly using methodological approaches. So more metrics, performance indicators, trying to measure what we're doing and how to do it best, how to get better results. Fundamentally, the goal is to have better outcomes without altering the structure of wealth management. So examples that may exist in soft reform are effective altruism, for example, and others that we may see. Okay, so moving to the space of radical reform, we ask ourselves the question: how can we dismantle existing power structures in philanthropy to genuinely empower marginalized communities and create systemic change not driven by donor agendas? So in the radical reform space actually challenges the very foundations of funding and philanthropic framework. It does address methodological concerns, and it does use from the methodological improvements as well, but it does question the underlying epistemological assumptions that perpetuates inequities itself. So it's questioning a little bit further down. So here in this space, institutions and individuals, they are trying to do things differently. You see people working on trying to get out of their same box head minds that used to operate before. So we also see here a fundamental shift in resource allocation, in decision-making process, and in the definition of impact. So sometimes we're still measuring impact, but we're trying to move to a different definition. The image related to this house is that the house is flawed. We need to change the inner architecture of the house We need to bring more people inside. We need to question the existence of the ladder, yet we are still operating within the same walls, floor, and roof. Sometimes the roof changes, as Azul mentioned, in the house, but still there's a fixed roof there. And some examples here includes participatory grant making, long-term unrestricted funds, and things that are working closer to communities, understanding that communities or projects itself knows best how to move. And then we move to the third space of reform, beyond reform. Beyond reform is actually grounded on a different starting point. There's no checklists or to-do here. Though we did develop 4 items here, contradictorily. But the idea here is that we develop capabilities to navigate these paradoxes, both within us and around us. So skills or depth capabilities, as we call them. For that, we have mapped these calls here. So the first call is a call to face both our complicity in harm and wealth complicity in harm. For example, by understanding the limitations of wealth stewarding itself in solving the meta crisis that we're in. So understanding that it's not possible to solve with that, due to its deep entanglement with historic and ongoing systemic and modern colonial violence. We should also consider finance interests, subconscious interests in keeping the system as it is while attempting to change it. So holding this paradox as well. Holding the paradox in the end that wealth cannot be decolonized. Then we get to the call to develop our vital compass, which is an invitation to work on cognitive, affective, and relational layers within oneself that are necessary to navigate all the contradictions and paradoxes and complicities that we start to face and to understand that we're part of. This compass can support us to set a direction, but it doesn't give us a route, a way to go. It sets a direction in a way that interrupts our patterns of staying immobilized or overwhelmed. So we are moving towards something, and most importantly, the compass helps us not to demand quick fixes or fixed solutions. Because as we saw before, the quick fixes, they create further problems, such as the climate false solutions, for example, that some of you may know, but some people that are doing this, they don't know what are the problems that it actually generates in indigenous communities or in other communities. This compass helps us as well to understand always what is the most next responsible step to take. So what is the most responsible next step to take? So at every given moment, what is the next small decision that I can make? Because we cannot design exactly where we are getting to. So I have to take it step by step. And also to act with accountability towards the earth that is in disease. The third compass, with the compass, we then move to the third call, which is to hospice modernity and hack the most generative strategies, both from soft and radical reform. So we don't have examples here of what and how we can do it, because sometimes you're hacking the strategies existing in the other spaces, but operating from a different space, coming from a different direction. So we can operate within existing institutions in the short term, usually not moving too fast or too far. So you push the boundaries of what is possible, but maintains in a long-term horizon that is decolonial, a long-term decolonial horizon, but understanding and recognizing that one can never operate fully outside of complicity in harm. This finally brings us to the fourth call here. And it's an important element of the palliative care that we're doing here for this house that is collapsing. An important element for that is to stay with the unknowability, things that we're not able to pre-design. So collectively tapping into adjacent possible futures while acknowledging who bears the cost of the pace of our learning. How much longer are we going to be in rooms trying to understand how to do best, and who is actually paying for the cost of that? It's about moving with awareness of the impact of those affected by our addictions to modernity. This process also involves reactivating exiled capacities that were exiled by modernity, by the house of modernity that we were raised, and trying not to let the boxhead or other immature passengers hijack our buses all the time. So the image here in Beyond Reform is that the current house no longer serves us. It doesn't work. It keeps us immature and addicted to its promises. We must hospice the dying house while assisting the emergence of new ways of living without it.
So yeah, this is a really, is my mic on? Yes. This is a really good segue into these conversations around capacity. So in the collective, we have mapped the different sensibilities that operate or that operate within these three spaces. And soft and radical reform, of course, in different degrees, are usually operating from a box head sensibility, which is related to this transactional mindset that is always calculating what can I get from this relationship with this person, or a transactional exploitative relationship with time, with self, with each other. It operates in a very teleological sense-making, which I'll speak a little bit more later. And it is also addicted, as Camilla said, to solutions, to validation, and to innocence. And the thing is, these addictions, which are very much dopamine-driven, prevent us from tapping into the fact that this house is beyond reform. The house itself is collapsing. And so in order to move from a beyond reform space, we need to activate exiled capacities. There's something weird here. Okay.
It's fine.
So, and one of the parallel projects that we're working on in the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Collective is working with an international group of artists who are trying to map what are these capacities that have been exiled and how can we bring them back to the body, not through a cognitive informational lens, but through artistic embodied practices using a decolonial understanding of somatic theory. And so today I'm going to share with you 3 of the capacities that we think are relevant for this workshop, but there's so many more that we're trying to sense into and understand. And one of them is complexity, which I know is a very hype word in social impact today, but the way we relate to complexity is very related to what Camilla was saying before, which is this capacity to face our complicity. So complexity is being able to engage and be with the beautiful, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the seriously messed up of reality and of ourselves, without being attached to a much more comfortable or idealized version, and without trying to escape what is disgusting, what is difficult, and what is painful. So it's a capacity to sit with the moving layers of complexity, both within ourselves, which is what the psychoanalytic distancing tool of the bus is for, and because only when we can sit with that complexity within ourselves, we're able to sit with the complexity outside of ourselves in a much more mature and discerning way. Then we have the visceral accountability, which refers to facing our responsibilities without excuse. It's about doing what is needed as opposed to doing what you want to do, which is very difficult if you were raised like me within the house of modernity. So this visceral accountability refers to a sense of accountability that comes from the gut. It is not an intellectual choice or a matter of convenience. It's coming from a gut that is connected and tethered to the living web of relationships that we're a part of, that is tethered to the land, which then takes us to the third capacity, which is the capacity to put oneself in service without needing to be remembered for that service, without needing to have a sense of legacy. So this is very different from transactional altruism, which often is grounded on the desire for innocence or legacy. This is coming, this type of service, when we speak to the elders that are part of our collective, they say that the energy and the vitality to be of service comes from the land itself, herself. And all we need to do is to plug into that land. I'm just going to share with you a very quick anecdote, which was not part of our script, but I promise I'll be brief, which was one day I called Mama Maria, who's one of the elders that sustains this work. And I was very heartbroken, and I said, Mama Maria, we're so messed up. Like, we are so in so much trouble as a species. What have we done? My voice breaks because I was in a really difficult place. And she said, you know, Azul, we've forgotten that we came here to be of service. And I asked her, how can we remember? And she said, the more you are of service, the more you will remember that that's what you came to do. So all of these capacities and many more begin to nourish what we call a vital compass, a compass of sobriety, maturity, discernment, and responsibility. And as Camilla spoke about the compass, a compass is not a route that takes you from place A to B. Because our imagination has been so heavily colonized, whatever we imagine as that arrival point is probably another version of the same house. Instead, if we have a vital compass that is grounded on this biointelligent wisdom of the land, and I'm not romanticizing it, it's not easy, we are moving and discerning at every step what is the most responsible and accountable thing to do. And that's a very different way to move from the modern grammar that we're used to. Okay, so another way to understand this cartography is through a scale. We have 10 minutes?
8 minutes left.
For questions? Or
No, for everything.
So we don't have time for questions?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna rush you.
No, just do however you feel.
Okay, yeah, so there's this understanding that in the soft reform, colonialism is a past event, and in the beyond reform, there's an understanding that colonialism has psychoaffective and neurobiological layers, that it lives within us, and that we have to do that unlearning process in order to move with the work we want to do. Then there's the recognition of the crisis, which I spoke about before. And then there's, this sense of accountability, which shifts from selective accountability, so from being accountable to my own wealth or to my own organization, to a wider accountability. For example, we have some families that, actually I'll just speak about that in the call for reparations. So this sense of visceral accountability is really a call for reparations. And often we see this word being thrown around, reparations are needed, but often what happens is that Boxhead hacks, in the wrong way of hacking, these reparations, and they're grounded then on shame and guilt. So reparations get instrumentalized in order to placate our shame and guilt that comes from wealth that we have or the people that we don't have. So for example, families who do historic research on where their wealth came from, and then they realize, for example, that it came from mining in Congo. So they do reparation work to mobilize those resources to families in Congo today. Now, this work is important, but it is insufficient if it is grounded, again, in the desire to be seen as innocent, as pure, and to placate the guilt. Because the thing is, if we are focused on the guilt and the shame, we cannot tap into that metabolic call to be of service. It really gets on the way. And so what does it mean then to be in a space where we understand that it's impossible to track the violence and the pain that has been created because of wealth? Like, we're speaking about entire communities and knowledge systems and prayer systems that have been erased from the face of the earth. There's no way to quantify that. And through our global commodity chains, there's also no way to track who has bear the cost, like precisely, of the wealth and the privileges that we have, which is not a way to escape from this responsibility, but to understand that reparations are needed in order to hospice this house. We say in our collective that we don't need to dismantle the house because the house is falling apart. And we are all feeling it within ourselves and outside. It's so clear, especially for people of my generation. Like, there's no way to deny this. So if we don't know for how much longer capital is going to be useful. We don't know for how much longer these walls are going to hold. So while we can, we have to use these resources in order to support also the midwifing of other possible worlds that are emerging or that have been outside of the house for a long time, and doing the composting work. See here, there's no floor of separability in this image. Doing the composting work in ourselves to be of service and to get out of the way, to give the way to those who might know best what we should do right now. And that is not to romanticize indigenous peoples and say they have the answers, or young people and say they have the answers. Nobody has the answers, but we do need an incredible level of humility to be able to face and to embrace the ecology of knowledges that is needed to move forward and maybe potentially survive as a species.
Okay, so reorganizing here in our last few minutes. Thank you so much. It was a lot. Maybe your buses are burning or collapsing or avoiding everything that we're saying. And so a lot of voices might be coming up. We invite you to continuously use this exercise and the psychoanalytical distancing too. And we will end with the questions. We're going to leave some questions for you to carry on throughout your day and your next weeks in life ahead. So the idea is that you listen to these questions from a more mature passenger. So try to identify within your bus a more mature passenger and how it does relate to the questions that we're going to read to you next.
The first question is, to what extent are we aware of how we're being read by communities we're trying to help? And who in these communities would legitimately roll their eyes at what we're doing?
Oops, sorry. So what is this work really about? Who are you actually accountable to?
Oh, it's not shifting. Who's benefiting the most from this work? And in what ways could it be read as self-serving or self-congratulatory?
Oops. And finally, to what extent can we respond with humility, with honesty, with humor, when our work or our self-image is challenged? So we end our session with that, and just reflecting on the work that needs to be done ahead, aiming beyond the confines of the linear modernity that we are living in. And in the spirit also of the collective inquiry that we're part of, we would just like to share this project here, the University of the Forest project, that is an educational initiative rooted in the intergenerational transmission of knowledge of the Runicuí indigenous people in the Amazon in Brazil. UOF, as it's called, emphasizes relational sciences and technologies of reverence, of respect, of reciprocity, and of responsibility towards the land. So it's trying to bridge traditional knowledge with contemporary educational practices. And yeah, by engaging with UOF, you have the chance also to develop these capabilities that Azul was talking about, trying to address the social and ecological challenges that we face through a decolonial lens, keeping in mind how we're part of the problem as well, not only part of the solution. So UOF is currently a partnership with the University of Victoria in Canada in an attempt to understand existing institutions as possible partners as well that go beyond what is rendered possible within academic realms. UOF is also an umbrella for fundraising for projects against climate false solutions and education initiatives that are important for indigenous people and everyone that is actually, everyone like people and organizations that are trying to intentionally repair their relationship with the earth, with the whole. And the responsibilities that come when we start this unlearning process. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope we can continue to move with humility, with honesty, with humor, and with commitment to the visceral accountability that we're called to. Thank you.